All right, Chelsea fans, welcome back to another episode. That's right, of the London is Blue podcast. Hopefully your favorite Chelsea podcast out there and a part of the Men in Blazers Media Network. A little midweek double match preview special for you. That's right, Chelsea back in action in midweek with Thursday night Conference League football against Panathinaikos, the Greek team. And then over the weekend, then back again for a League Cup fixture, a match against Newcastle. So this essentially is kind of actually 3-match previews in one. Never been done on the London is Blue podcast feed before. Always first sometimes that we run into here. And of course, I wouldn't be doing a match preview right. We wouldn't be doing right by you if the match preview did not include the assessment, the analysis, the insight of one Sam CFC Central. And I know, Sam, there's a lot of fixtures coming up here, and we just want to make sure at the top that you're getting enough time in between these fixtures to relax and reset in between there.
Then it's going to get more frantic, and I think by the time we reach Noah, I'll probably have to be in Yerevan trying to find their games because finding Greek games was hard enough. But yeah, I've done games in trains, and I'll probably have to do a couple more on flights. But it's all part of experiencing this and having a good time. So as long as I get to do these with you, always a pleasure. So yeah, can't wait to get tucked into it. And obviously, groundbreaking triple match preview on this one. So hopefully, we'll be able to point out a couple of great points to look at before we face the Greeks. And obviously, Newcastle were going to be, I think, quite a tricky fixture.
Yeah, definitely no really easy matches left in the month of October for this Chelsea side. We don't want to kind of bypass those Conference League matches too, especially considering that there will be a lot of rotation for those. And so maybe some of your top tier players, Cole Palmer, will not be involved in those matches. So you have to kind of adjust the scale of expectation there. So we're going to get into this episode with a review or a look ahead to Panathinaikos. We're going to talk about Newcastle. We'll take a look at both of what those teams are doing well, where there are opportunities potentially for Chelsea to exploit, and then try to walk through a couple of key considerations that Enzo Maresca is going to have to undertake to make sure that Chelsea do the business across as many competitions as possible. Because look, it's going to be hard to keep pace with Sonia Bonpastor and what that Chelsea women's team is doing. So we would like both the men and the women, Enzo and Sonia, to get the job done across all competitions, if at all possible. But before we do that, the admin at the top, always get it out of the way first. If you haven't left a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, we'd always appreciate that. Good opportunity to do that right now as you're listening. You can do it in the app as you're listening, so you don't even have to leave out of that potentially. If you head over to YouTube, you can sign up to subscribe. You can hit the like icon and get notified if you hit the bell icon when we drop a new video up there. Wonderful new video with Justin Nath going through the Chelsea South American contingent, what's going on with Estêvão and others. Very, very great content there. So make sure you get that in your YouTube feeds to subscribe, like, and comment on those. Look, we've got a newsletter. It's fantastic. It's free. You can sign up for that. The London Blue Dispatch. Sam writes wonderfully eloquent exposés that you just have to check out. And then you can sign up for our free or paid version of our Discord community to get in the conversation. The Thursday Match Day Madness thread is going to be off the charts with some afternoon, at least in the US, football to get into. But look, that's all the details out of the way. The admin's done. And we're going to get chatting about the 6th place team in the Super League Greece, Panathinaikos, who currently have a record in the league of 3-3-2 with 12 total points at the moment. A home record of 2-1-1 with 7 points and away record of 1-2-1, 5 points. They have only scored 7 league goals. They have allowed 6. They have some wins in some competitions, but their Conference League fixtures have resulted in a win and a draw. So, that is something for them to kind of point to. In the last 2, they beat Lens 2-0, and then Brock with a 1-1 draw the last match that they played. Sam, I know the information was hard to get for this one. There's just not a lot of footage out there. So we want to kind of caveat at the top that the assessment may not be as deep as they usually are for this, but there was a little bit of footage from these Conference League matches that we can get into. And maybe just to set the stage, what should the expectation be around a sixth place Greek side in relation to where would that kind of be skill wise, roster makeup wise? Is there a comp that you can give somebody who doesn't have an understanding of where to place them within the football hierarchy of quality?
It's definitely, I actually thank you for putting it out there because I can only go on the basis of what I have, and the footage that I was able to find was against Lons in the qualifiers to get to the group stage of the Conference League. And yeah, it's a good side, and they were able to basically knock them out over two legs. So that gives you maybe the perfect comp in terms of what to expect. Like you can probably look at them as like a talented potential giant killing side. Like think of a FA Cup fourth or fifth round side that makes it into the the upper tiers and is able to spring a surprise if they play well to that day. So they do have some good strengths, and when I look at their side, Dan, there's a lot of individual quality. So there's a mix of like FM legends and a couple of cult heroes there. So just to give you an example, Tony Vilhena, I think, was very popular in FM 2017, 2016. One of the centre backs is Tinjedbai, who actually was in the Croatia squad for the World Cup that they lost in the final to France. Azzedine Ounahi, who was one of Morocco's standout players in the World Cup. He was actually somebody we spoke about when the World Cup was going on, and we pointed out as somebody who could get a big move, and he moved to Marseille after that. So he's also in the squad, not getting as many minutes as I thought he would. And there are a couple of other recognizable names like Tete, who was Mudrik's teammate at Shakhtar. So he's played Conference Leagues and Europa League and Champions League also. So he's also played in the Premier League for Leicester on loan a couple of years ago. So lots of talent there. But when I look at it from a team perspective, maybe they're not there in terms of meshing all that quality together. And I think that's what I'm a little apprehensive of. It's a good collection of individuals, but it doesn't look like a football team to me. So we'll set the stage there and hopefully dig deeper.
Wow. And I think if you're saying they don't look like a football team, that is a nice way of putting a very critical comment from the lens of Sam if you're able to decode exactly what he's saying there. At least that's just my perspective on it. Why don't you jump into maybe just what are some of the extra expectations around style of play? I think we can kind of talk a little bit about where they're kind of structurally set up to give us an understanding of what we should expect when we see that lineup to help people decode what they're looking at. Maybe a little bit about they obviously qualified for the Conference League this last season, but seemingly maybe struggling in the league a little bit more this season. So can you help contextualize, at least in the top, where this team's at currently?
Yeah, definitely. I was unable to watch any games from last season, and it looks like the squad's changed quite a bit. So they finished fourth in the league last time around, and this time around they're sixth. And to give you context, sixth is firmly mid-table in the Greek league, which has 14 teams. So they've started off poorly in terms of just forms and fixtures. When I've looked at least all the other fixtures on paper, they've been pretty consistent with that system. It's a 4-2-3-1, and sometimes they've resorted to a 4-3-3 within games. They've started with that 4-3-3, I think, on two occasions, but mostly it's a 4-2-3-1. In possession, it's quite fluid. Let's put it that way. Like it moves to the number 10 dropping and becoming an extra 8, so it's a 4-3-3. But sometimes both the pivots stay and the number 10 moves up next to the center forward as an auxiliary center forward, so it becomes a 4-2-4. So they're quite flexible in that regard. And it's a clear demarcation of responsibilities then. So it's like the back six just predominantly helps with defensive responsibilities. Also, moving the ball whenever they can. They're not very possession heavy in the Conference League. Like in the league, I've seen that possession stats are quite good, 60.4, which would put, I mean, compared to the Premier League, that would be in the top three, four sides. in terms of average possession. But obviously, we're not looking at the Greek league. We want to look at when they're up against the quality that is going to be there when they face us. So when I looked at Lens, they didn't really dominate the ball in the second leg when there was parity in terms of numbers. So you can expect the side to be maybe playing on the break exclusively, and also when you do press them, then figuring out if they can play the old school way. So just to give you the essence of it, Dan, if I could maybe sum it up as succinctly as I could, it's a throwback to peak Barclays football. It's a big man up front looking to knock down big balls and basically get the front three involved, and the back six takes care of everything to do with defending and keeping the box clean.
I mean, people love a good reboot. So, I mean, this is an opportunity for a throwback, a football of your potentially consideration. And I mean, definitely something that I think may, particularly with how physical it could or couldn't be, potentially be a rude awakening for some players that don't prefer that style of fixture and game within our squad. But definitely things to consider. We're going to take a very quick ad break when we get back. More conversation around Panathinaikos, and then ahead more and a lot of conversation around Newcastle. So stay tuned. We'll be right back. So Sam, I know we were talking about the throwback to peak Barclays football, but are there any other maybe styles of play, or do we want to jump into some of the weaknesses that you're expecting to be on full display on Thursday night?
Yeah, I think what I'd probably like to maybe start with before we go into weaknesses is referencing the games that I saw and how they turned out. So the first leg was away for them, and they basically went to Lens, and Lens took an early lead after some promising attacks, and then they lost their centre back to a red card in the 22nd minute. And despite being a man up for 60 minutes, Panathinaikos having 60% plus possession, they created literally nothing. Like in that first half, there were basically zero big chances created, and Lons actually went two up before halftime, and they spent a lot of time dawdling, trying to find ways to break them open. Got a goal through some incredible skill, individual skill from the centre forward Fortis Ioannidis, who we're going to talk about later on in this preview, but they couldn't win. So that game ended 2-1. But they conceded six big chances on the evening. They only created two against 10 men. And it wasn't really a good reflection in terms of what they could do. In the reverse fixture, things just completely flipped. I think home crowd played a big advantage, and it was a quite feisty affair where a very, very big penalty call went against them, and their keeper, Dragowski, who has been their most informed player this season, actually went on and saved it. And that momentum shift happened, and they basically went and scored twice without reply and managed to sneak into the Conference League. So when I look at the playing style, like I mentioned, peak Barclays ball, what you should be aware of is they will try to find Ioannidis, who's this 24-year-old, also playing for the Greek national team. So he's quite good with his feet. He's also kind of a bully, so he looked to be a battering ram, go up against your centre backs, try to bring the wingers into play. On the left hand side, Filip Juricic, who's quite a veteran campaigner. So he's actually the top scorer in the league with three goals. And the guy who scored the winner on that Conference League fixture is Tete, who's on the right hand side. So those two wingers seem to be along with the centre forward, their main outlets for attack. Not really been impressed by the number 10, and doesn't look like he's a playmaker, Pakasetsas, and he looks like more a support striker, part number 8 who tries to keep it nice and clean. But yeah, the threat comes from the two wingers as well as the centre forward. So you have to be careful of that. The set pieces also look quite dangerous. And Dan, you and I have talked about this on the review pod with Nick. Set pieces have been an issue, so you have to be careful because the atmosphere seems very good away. So it's going to be not an easy place to play, especially for um, I wouldn't want to say the B side, but a side that's heavily rotated. So if you do go a goal down, then it could become, an affair like that second leg, which you don't want it to happen. So that's just stuff that you have to be careful about. I think you mentioned that in the league, the defense is quite good. I've been very impressed with Yedvai as well, who seems like a sound defender. So, along with an informed goalkeeper, good set pieces, and just six players making sure that you have to defend and keep it nice and tight. It's going to be an interesting affair, and I really hope that our guys are hungry and really up for it.
Well, that I think takes us to a conversation around where some of those weaknesses are, and maybe no, on no surprise, or in no surprise to anyone, there will be some. There will be a few when you are mid-table within your division or your league, and a couple of them come to mind for me just upon like looking at some of the numbers or the results. It feels like there's some form and consistency issues. I mean, you mentioned things about who the players are. If you're a standout from 2017 in Football Manager, maybe average age of the squad or some of the quality of players in position might be a bit of a area to circle for Maresca as a I want to go exploit this. So can you give us a rundown on some of those areas where you think Maresca is just absolutely excited to put his team on paper, to let his team run onto the pitch and really attack this Greek side?
Yeah, I think the first most important thing would be to look at the form book and say that it looks indifferent. And it seems like they're struggling to score. That seems to be their bane at this point. They've only scored 7, 8 league games, like you pointed out. And there's also a heavy reliance on individual talent to be difference makers. And like I said, it doesn't look like a football team. And what I meant by that was it doesn't look like a unit that has any kind of dynamics other than just one guy trying to take on the defense and create something. There are no one twos around the box. There are no like quick, clever interchanges. There are no repeatable patterns as such that I can discern. It's more about just trying to let them express themselves. And it looks like a cluttered mess from what I've seen. So unfortunately, it looks like it isn't working for them. Ioannidis, who I mentioned, the center forward, he scored 15 last season, and he's basically like struggling at this point in time. So it does look like without any of those three guys stepping up, it's going to be hard for them. So goals are 100% something that that's pulling them down. Average age of the squad, the entire squad is 29. Some of the fixtures that they've played, it's 28.5, 29 around that mark. So it's quite an experienced side. It's also quite, like you mentioned, it's also filled with the players who have played at a higher level, but maybe have come to a lower one to sort of like find their level here. And that sort of shows because a lot of the times it does look like they're lacking intensity. And this happens a lot with that counter pressing moments, like when you're supposed to really, really put your foot on the accelerator and make sure that nobody's able to breathe. Those guys tend to be just a little lacking urgency, and that can like really, really hurt you badly. So Willian Arau, who's the left defensive midfielder, I think he's 32. There are a couple of 33-year-olds in the side as well. So there are a couple of seasoned campaigners who will struggle if we bring the intensity. So when Maresca is looking at this, he'll probably say, "I'm going to try and absolutely batter you with pace and speed and power as much as I can, and hope that it's too much for you to cope with." So that's something to keep an eye on. On that point, I'd also like to point out that Filip Mladenovic, who's at left back, is 33, and he looks like he can be exploited one versus one. So if you have the opportunity, and most probably it'll be Pedro Neto starting on the right hand side. If you can isolate him with the left back, I think that creates a lot of avenues to get through. So that's something that I'll probably point out as like a thing to do consistently in the game. And something I've noticed, like in terms of tactics, they tend to be quite, um, yeah, I mean, they tend to struggle a lot when they're trying to play back to goal. So a couple of times they tried building out from the back. I think tried using the quality gap that is there in the Greek league to say, okay, we're going to build up very intricately and pass out. And they got pressed and dispossessed and realized that the speed wasn't, the speed and talent level was quite um, like different compared to a League One side. So they basically had to just resort to going long over and over again. So the midfield is not really adept at playing under pressure or playing back to goal. So anytime somebody's receiving back to goal, just press as hard as possible, and you'll win the ball. And Alonso are able to do this consistently. So try to put them under pressure, and when they crack at the earliest opportunities, make sure you've catered for the long balls. That's the easy way to put it. And like I mentioned, the midfield looks a little slow. So a double pivot, if you ask them to step up and get out of their comfort zone, prone to be turned over. So I think if you've got quicker dribblers dribbling at them centrally, then they have a major problem. So that's how I would sum it up. Slightly slow, age being a factor, and goals are hard to come by.
Well, definitely something where when you think about that assessment, it does feel like it's a good opportunity for our Chelsea players to hopefully fully take advantage and puts us in a good position to continue a strong start to this round of fixtures in the Conference League. So hopefully that is the order and long may it continue. But I'd love to shift gears because we have another team that will be playing twice in back-to-back fixtures, and it would be good to get into a conversation around Newcastle and maybe just from a league perspective, not lighting the league up the same way that they did last season. Current record 332, so 12 total points, ninth in the league. Home record is 2-1-1, 7 points. Away record of 1-2-1, 5 points. They are perfectly balanced. As one Thanos might say, in 8 goals and 8 goals against. They've been a little back and forth on their fixture results. I mean, we saw that they lost to Fulham back in September 3-1, and they did play Newcastle, I think, fairly well with the 1-1 draw. They did advance against Wimbledon in a 1-0 victory to play us in the League Cup. And then they drew against Everton, and then they lost to Brighton 1-0. So to me, it is like a whack-a-mole of results here, Sam. And maybe just before we get into where their style of play is currently, obviously Eddie Howe did not get to the England job, potentially does not even interviewed for the job, which was apparently a talking point, but he will remain as Newcastle's manager, at least currently, because of that. What's your assessment on where they're at currently? And then we can get into just an update about how they're playing and talk about strengths and weaknesses.
If you remember, Dan, in the last preview, I said that I was a little apprehensive about Liverpool because they had a summer of turbulence, and sometimes what happens off the pitch can hit you very hard. And Newcastle are a great example of how that has happened. So for people who haven't sort of kept in the loop, they finished pretty strongly last season, and they were looking to just take that into this season. But it seems like their sporting director Paul Mitchell and manager Eddie Howe are generously putting it not on the same page. Apparently, they don't even talk to each other, have no working relationship at all. They also signed one of Europe's top winger prospects, Yanguba Minte, and then immediately had to sell him to Brighton because of FFP issues. They also had to sell Elliot Anderson to Nottingham Forest, and he was a pretty promising academy prospects. So that created a lot of bitterness inside. So it's in essence like they've had just a disastrous window. Let's put it that way. It's they haven't strengthened at all. Like at this point, you would probably say, okay, we finished strong. Let's assess at what our strengths and weaknesses are and add the right players. But they just haven't been able to do that. And the strength I think comes from returning players. Livramento, for example, who Chelsea fans will know very well. He's now fit and firing, so he's basically Trippier's ready-made heir, and he's come in. Lewis Hall, another player we gave him, is now also shining at left back, so he's there. But overall, I don't think they've strengthened over last season, and especially for a side that will be playing a lot of games this season, it looks like they're very stretched thin. So maybe that's the reason why they've started so slow. Like their results have been all over the place. They haven't really scored as much as they'd like. Their individuals have dropped off, and that's the thing. Then it just looks like they're in a bit of a rut. I expect them to get better. Hopefully after the game. After the games that they play against us, but it's a wounded animal. So I would just put a little bit of caution to the wind, saying you shouldn't treat them as harmless. They might just wake up here and snap your hand off. So I'm quite cautious about this. I'm a little worried.
It does feel like a potential trap opportunity here for Chelsea to just get caught out, particularly playing, in back to backs. That would be kind of a consideration here. I mean, we did win three of the fixtures we had against them last season. We had the 4-1 loss in the league, but we beat them in penalties in the League Cup, and then we won 3-2 at home in March of this year. So, I mean, recent form better than maybe anticipated. I mean, in general, over the last, 10 games or so, I mean, it's really been three losses here, a draw, and the remainder were wins. So in general, we've had their number a bit. And so you should be maybe a little bolstered by that. We also have a team that's 1 year older in a lot of areas. So hopefully they can build upon there, particularly in the essence of you talking about maybe some squad concerns with this Newcastle side. But can you give us a little bit of a reminder or refresher on, for those who are not watching Newcastle week to week or only seeing it in the snippets, how they're playing currently and maybe what our expectations should be around some of those players of note who are going to be danger men across multiple positions for this Chelsea team to deal with.
Absolutely. So it's going to be a little bit of a refresher course in terms of what we did in the previews last season because it's the same manager. So it's the standard 4-3-3, something they've used throughout last season. It hasn't changed. And it's filled with either tall, strong, or mostly both profile of players. So athleticism, power, and just being able to run relentlessly seems to be, prerequisite for being in this Newcastle side. They morph into this very stubborn 4-5-1 mid block out of possession, which is extremely frustrating because you want to try and play those balls through the middle into those pockets just before the last line of the defense, and Newcastle basically prevent that. It's a very, very narrow 4-5-1 or a 5-4-1, and getting the balls to those danger men like Cole Palmer or even Nicholas Jackson or even say Nkunku, if he comes on, tries to find those pockets in between, not going to happen because Newcastle don't allow you to do that. And that 4-5-1 then becomes a 5-4-1 low block, which is even more frustrating. So usually they adapt to the threat. So to give you an example, against Manchester City, what they did was, because they felt like Doku on the right hand side would be quite a handful, what they did was they dropped Joe Linton to left wing back and made sure that there was double cover there to ensure that Doku would not be 1v1. He would always have a double team there. So they adapt their back five in that sense. So it'll be interesting to see what they do against us. Probably put a 2v1 on Madueke is my guess. But that's how they stop you. And City generated only 0.91 xg in that game. And they had to rely on this excellent finish from Josko Guardiola to basically run away with a point. They're usually poor, Dan, against sides where they're expected to win and they're expected to be a little more expansive. So the two games where they've conceded 2 plus XG against Fulham and against Bournemouth, they also conceded, I think, 1.8 against Southampton on the opening day, and that's when it gets a little feisty for them. But against sides where they're expected to be underdogs and expected to be compact and they're happy to sit back, like the game against us, that's when they come alive. So I think it's a good matchup for them, and they'll ensure that it is quite difficult for us. I was lucky enough to have Brighton as a sample size, and they were terrific in the first half. Like they easily could have been 2-3 up. Alexander Isak had a horrible game. Could have finished and put them 2-0 up, but they basically didn't finish their chances. And Welbeck had one, and he stole all 3 points for Brighton. But Newcastle were well and clear of Brighton in that first half. Brighton got better in the second, but that game could have been over by halftime. So that's the worry. They match up well against sides that want to play against them. Style wise, it's again they will look to win the ball very aggressively in the press. They also go like man to man in high build up, so they will try to close down all near options. And when they win the ball centrally, it's always trying to target those 4v4s and 5v5s in the last line and then use the speed of Anthony Gordon, the speed of Alexander Isak, the speed of Joe Linton to try and get those openings inside your box. So that's going to be the main threat. And in sustained possession, when they've had the ball for, I would say, maybe like 2.5, 3 minutes, that's when they push other men forward, and mostly that's the fullback. So it's going to be Lewis Hall or Livramento underlapping or overlapping into the box. I think Trippier is fit for this one, so you might see him on the right hand side, and he's going to be a great set piece threat as well as a direct free kick threat. So that's something we have to be careful about. And one thing, Dan, I really like about them, and something that also like we have to be careful about is how well they rotate their personnel. So there's a constant rotation between the winger, the number eight, and the fullback on the same side. And sometimes Bruno Guimaraes will also shift and make it like a four-man sort of diamond or a box on the right-hand side. And to handle those combinations, it's very, very hard. So you'll sometimes find Tonali on the right wing, or you'll find Joe Linton on the left wing completely empty, unmarked, because the men haven't been able to keep up with them in terms of marshalling them, and they'll have all the time in the world to cross into the box. So you have to be very disciplined. You have to keep an eye on who's escaping when and who's rotating in or out. I think that's what Newcastle do very, very well. And the last thing I'd probably say is like Nick Pope's numbers make him one of the league's top shot stoppers this season. So if you do get a 1v1, you have to be definitive. You're probably not going to get too many chances of that quality. So his only weaknesses for me seem to be like coming for crosses, and we don't have many people to sort of target those aerial opportunities anyway. So getting past him will be important, and hopefully you don't need like too many chances to make it happen.
Well, definitely something that we will want to ensure does not become the case as maybe it was over the last fixture where the shots came. Did not come often and were not converted with high quality or a high percentage. So let's hope that we are looking to reverse that trend across the next two or three fixtures here and for the remainder of the season. We're going to take our last ad break. When we get back, we're going to talk about some of the weaknesses in this side where Chelsea are going to look to exploit and get the job done. But stay tuned and we'll be right back. Okay, Sam. So they're not a perfect side, as evidenced by their league position, some of their recent run of results. So, are there a couple areas, maybe with player availability? I think Isak was like one of the names we saw linked to Chelsea over the summer, did not get maybe considered or come. And maybe in comparison to someone like Nico Jackson, who is still finding the back of net with some regularity, does not feel like it is the same for the key striker slash target man for Newcastle. I know also their center back pairing is a little suspect. Those are ones that come to mind for me, but are there other areas on top of those you want to potentially dig into as their weaknesses?
Yeah, just like Panathinaikos, I think Newcastle are struggling for goals, and it's usually not the case with them. They tend to be very free scoring. So if you look at just their recent record, it's like 3 goals scored in the last 5 games, and they scored only 8 in 8 all season, as you mentioned earlier. And Alexander Isak has scored like one in nearly 500 minutes of football. So he's underperforming on his XG, which I believe is 2.29 this season. And of their starters, only Anthony Gordon has scored more than one. Harvey Barnes has scored three. He's their top scorer. But the thing with Barnes, Dan, is the fact that I think he's coming off an injury layoff, and he's also maybe like, there's a tactical dilemma for how, because he wants against the more quality sides to be more compact and to be very good out of possession, and he uses Murphy on the right wing to ensure that there's a lot of hard running, there's a lot of closing down angles and intercepting the ball, and then Barnes comes out later. But that means losing what is essentially an excellent wide threat. somebody who's an incredible winger on that side, who's able to go for you, obviously, goals, which are very, very hard to come by. So he'll probably come on as a sub, but they're going to basically not play their top scorer against us, which, I mean, barring a curveball, I believe is going to be quite the decision to make. Um, you mentioned the Newcastle centre back pairing. So there's this interesting dynamic since it's Burn and Share. And I believe Botman is out long term, so he's not going to feature. But what the centre back pairing decides on is that it's Dan Burn who usually steps out of the defensive line to mark a centre forward. So you essentially have to do this as much as possible, because whenever he tried stepping on to Welbeck against Brighton, when he tried doing it to Haaland, he got burned. Every single time he tried to go after a centre forward, he didn't know what to do. There were a couple of times where Brighton just played like circles around him, and he's great in the box when he has to win things in the air, but outside it, when he has to tackle people and essentially like when he's trying to close them down, quite slow. He's also aging, so you can definitely exploit him. Somebody like a Jackson, I would just instruct him saying drop as much as possible and move to the wings as much as possible, like move away as much as possible. Go to the left wing, collect, ask somebody else to occupy that space, and see how many problems you can cause. The other reason I would sort of correlate to the goals factor. They were fifth, I think they were fourth in the league last season from set pieces, and they scored 15, and they've only scored one goal in 8 games this time around. So that's a big reason for them not sort of getting those crucial goals. They also prefer, like strongly prefer, in swinging corners, and there's a tendency to pair their two best aerial threats like Dan Burn and Joe Linton to attack the near post or the far post. So wherever those two guys are running together, that's where the corner is going to arrive. So I think that's something that the set piece team has to take care of. And another tactical weakness I've noticed is that Guimaraes tends to be a little adventurous. Like I mentioned, he will try to create those overloads on either wing. So whenever he does drift wide and he loses the ball, play it in the center or give it to a dribbler and ask him to dribble towards the center. Because the moment you do that, you're going to be dribbling at either a vacant midfield or you're going to be 1v1 against Dan Burn. And that's where you might be able to get them yellows, or you'll be able to basically break into space. And Brighton did this very well. So, with the quality we have, I believe if Guimaraes does try to be a little too cheeky with his positioning, trying to push up to be a passing threat, that's something you can definitely exploit because he's not been in the best form either, like the rest of Newcastle. So you'll probably be able to exploit that as well. So lots of weaknesses, Dan, especially like against a side that's been struggling. But I would like to reiterate, it is a dangerous side. They gave Man City a very, very tough time,
Yeah.
Brighton as well. So I expect them to come hard at us because this could be the fixture that changes the entire outlook of the season for them so far. And that's what you have to be careful about.
Well, let's hope that that is not the case. But I do think in taking that all in and digesting it, there's probably some questions or considerations that I think fans, supporters will be thinking about as we head into this match. Considerations that Maresca is going to have to make, particularly with all of the fixtures coming in back to back to back succession very, very quickly. I mean, we're playing within 7 days, 3 games, and that is always going to test the managerial might and then the depth of your roster. What are you love to use this section to flip it around on me. Do you have some thoughts or things that you're thinking about that we should be thinking about as supporters for the key questions that Maresca has to answer?
And definitely, I love this part. I really, really am glad that I decided to flip it around. But yeah, the first question would be, I think, pretty straightforward and one that's been asked a lot in the past couple of days. So with Romeo Lavia back and obviously him playing over Enzo Fernandez in that pivot role, what do you believe is Enzo's long-term future with us? And
Oh,
how do you rotate those two guys with like fitness issues over these 3 games? Like, do you play him in the League Cup, or like do you play him as a starter in the Conference League, obviously because Lavia is not there. So what's your dynamic here? Like where does Enzo get either relegated to, or does he keep his spot until Lavia is fully fit?
I think that's a tough one, considering the fact that, I mean, we've now seen 130 minutes of Premier League football from Romeo Lavia, which is 103 minutes more than he played in the entirety of last season. We have seen him for 3 matches and 2 starts, compared to the 1 match that we saw him in last season, which was a substitute appearance and not even a start. So it does feel like this is the delicate balancing act, because there's also Dewsbury Hall, who would be kind of maybe considered within that midfield contingent as well as a, would you play him in some capacity as well as the further forward individual? I mean, we have seen, Enzo potentially getting further back, but some of the challenges on the left hand side when he's, playing, particularly if it's, not Kukurea there, but he will have returned for at least some of these fixtures. Maybe he doesn't play all of them. Vega definitely could be, I think, in consideration to start against Panathinaikos. So it does feel like this season will define whether or not Enzo, the player, and maybe the manager if things go poorly, but hopefully that's not the case. But if Enzo has a very secure long term future, or if he will be in the early stages of Chelsea evaluating, is there an opportunity? Is there a market to move on from him? And is there maybe a better individual to bounce the midfield contingent that we have? It feels like it's probably too early to say that Lavia has locked down anything. I think we want to see, between now and the end of the year, can he start 8 matches across the remainder? Can he start, potentially 10? I mean, we've got plenty of fixtures for him to get involved in. And I think that would build confidence in my mind as a viewer, as a supporter of the club, and as a individual fan of everybody who plays for Chelsea and puts on a Chelsea shirt. I think that would give me confidence to have better clarity. I think they are not necessarily conjoined as it relates to what their futures look like. I think it's more, they have developmental paths that both of them should be on to improve as players. And can Enzo Maresca get the best out of one or both of them? But I do think it is a little too early still. I feel like it's a jury still out on Enzo, but I feel like we're starting to build a case. Whereas Lavia, I don't even know if you have enough evidence to put the case together yet.
And that's very fair. I think that's a very well measured response. It's definitely going to be interesting. I don't want to even make predictions for this one, since there's conflicting evidence, like you mentioned. Lavia was, I think, a fixture throughout preseason, and it did look like Maresca had a plan for him, like a very solid plan in terms of where he wanted to play, and sort of build the side in terms of the progression around that particular side. So maybe that's something we see like come to fruition, and that's something that I'm super intrigued by. So I think a great response from you. Next question. I think my last question for this preview would be, Reece James is in the Conference League squad, I think. So what's the plan with, getting him back to full fitness? Would you sort of make sure that he gets around 60 minutes against Newcastle, or is it still too early to sort of, use him to an extent where you could risk putting him in the kind of difficult challenges that we have before? So how do you sort of get him back maybe up to speed before Arsenal? Like, what's the plan?
Gosh, I feel like it has to be very limited in terms of the amount of minutes, with just how risk adverse I am, but also trying to figure out the fact that, like, he has a unfortunate ability to re-injure himself at seemingly a high propensity. And so I would rather him potentially only be available for a shorter period of time in that Arsenal fixture. Maybe it's still, a planned substitution at 60, 65 minutes, for someone like Malo Gusto, with Kukurea playing on the left. That to me feels way more comfortable than potentially risking him, in extra minutes in either the Panathinaikos or the League Cup fixture, for against Newcastle. I do feel like we'll see a lot of gusto across maybe both of those fixtures to give James an opportunity to start and then potentially be relieved by someone in the Premier League fixture that we have sandwiched in between the two alternative fixtures.
Yeah, I think I'm on the same page. I do worry a lot about Reese. I think at this point in time, the best thing you can do is just give him the time he needs. Obviously, I understand that with Kukurea suspended, you had to consider the circumstances and risk at least a half where he was, trying to defend against Liverpool's threat. But definitely, if there's any possibility, like especially in, I would say, the cup competitions where you don't have to risk him, don't risk him, especially when you have Gusto and Kukurea available to you. So again, a great response. But yeah, definitely. I think I'm super excited for these fixtures then. Like how are you feeling? Are you feeling like three wins coming our way, or are you being a little more pragmatic after, two games without a win?
Gosh, I feel like this is where we get burned in it. I do feel like the Conference League fixture is a win. I do feel like the cup fixture is going to be a win because I don't think the depth of squad for Newcastle at the moment is as deep as Chelsea's. So I feel like our rotation is going to be beneficial to us there if we can really execute well. I feel like I'm most questioning the league fixture and just the mental fortitude of the team to do the quick turn potentially because there will be a few players that feature across multiple fixtures as much as we try to potentially refresh the sides. So, I do think that is top of mind for me. It could be 3 wins. I think if I were just gonna maybe hedge a little bit, maybe 2 wins and a draw is probably a very realistic one, particularly because this Newcastle side also drew Man City, and we lost to Man City. And while I think we are a better team now than we were when we played Man City earlier in the season, there's still a lot that this team has to improve upon from a experience standpoint. Some of the naivety that they have in moments in relation to defending and maybe closing down and start our defensive structure definitely still more open than we should be. So hoping for 3 wins, wishing and willing as much as I can for 3 wins. Maybe more realistic to have 2 wins and a draw, but I will let you have the final word on what you think you will happen in your mind.
Yeah, three wins would be a great way to go about it, to be honest. And I do believe that there is maybe a slight possibility it happens. But I think two wins and maybe a draw is a more realistic expectation. I also wouldn't be surprised if we lose instead of draw. And I hate being like super negative on the pod, but I do think Newcastle are a very good side. We just haven't seen the best of them yet. And um, inevitably, any side that's struggling that comes up against us tends to come up with the goods. So it's just a little part of me saying that be cautious. I think that could happen, but yeah, if I had to put my money somewhere, I'd say like two wins and a draw. Hopefully, the draw in the cup, and we'll see what happens after that. But you don't want to drop points against Newcastle, so. But I'll be very happy with two wins and a draw if that happens.
Well, let us know your thoughts. What do you think is going to happen over the next run of fixtures? Chelsea have plenty to get into. We've got tons more content coming your way. We're going to have a Panathinaikos match review coming at you. We're going to be, I think, live after that Newcastle fixture over the weekend. And then we've got more in the following week. We have another journalist update, most likely from our good friend Matt Law, and other stuff coming. The Chelsea women's team in fine form, some YouTube specific content going on there as well. But that's going to do it for this episode. So thank you so much to you who are listening. Thank you so much to Sam for putting together another great set of work to help us understand the opposition appropriately. But that's going to do it. So until next time, Chelsea fans, you know what to do. Keep the blue flag flying high.